Football.
Hello, once again, and welcome to the Best of Football. Today we have a smaller team, just Jide and I. You know, the rains in Lagos are not the friendliest of things, and movements are largely disrupted, impaired, and what have you. But we are here ready to give you the best of football, and we hope that you enjoy the next 1 hour or thereabout as Jide and I try to have a helicopter view of World Cup 2026. Whether it was good, whether it was bad, and the fun sides, the beautiful sides, the dark sides, and we want to really assess World Cup 2026, everything about it. And so I will bring in Jide. Welcome to the best of football this time.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here again.
Okay, Jide, very quickly, a video was trending, like uh, the winning money for Spain of about 50 million pounds or dollars,
Yeah.
and it's thinned out to about 5 point something million because of the tax laws in the US. And I mean, what's your take?
That's is shocking. And I really hope it's not true. But it's not looking like it's not true. So it's going to, in my opinion, it's going to rubbish all the effort that's been put into this World Cup, because you first and foremost you have 48 teams, meaning more fatigue with all the extra traveling, players doing 6-hour trips across cities. You go through all of that, and then at the end of the day, you win the World Cup. And then from a 50 million naira prize money, you end up getting 6.5 million. It just seems like what was the war effort about?
It's looking like a rip-off.
It is a rip-off, because previous hosts gave guarantees for tax rebates and reliefs to FIFA and players. So why the US has not managed to do the same, and why FIFA has not come out to say anything about it, that's why I said I hope it is not true, because it will be such a disgrace if that actually happens. At the beginning of this competition, we had mentioned that FIFA typically gets all kinds of guarantees from host countries, but it seems like they bent over backwards for the US on this occasion.
And too many things. On too many things.
On too many things, truly. And this would be the icing on the cake if truly they have to lose almost 85-90% of their prize money to the US government.
Honestly, and then to think that it's a three-nation hosting. Mexico bringing something to the table, Canada bringing something to the table, and it's all the hassles, all the problems we have had or noticed. They're all US based.
Yes, US based. At the beginning of the competition as well, we mentioned that at the time it seemed like a good idea. That, from the knockout rounds, most of the games are going to be based in the US to, reduce travel time and, fatigue on the players. But now it's not looking like such a good idea if the US government comes up with something like this. Again, I hope it's not true, but it was supposed to be a good thing that the US hosted most of the games, but it speaks to how the US government sees the co-hosts that supported them in this competition.
Exactly.
They are the only ones who feel that they need to make money off this competition.
Okay. Having said that, let's, like you said, let's hope it's not true, but it's looking like it's true.
Yeah.
And if it is, it'll be very unfortunate, and I think to have negative impacts on the chances of the US hosting another World Cup, not within the next few decades.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the organization. A lot of people believe that it was a historic achievement, and some have scored the entire tournament 9/10. What's your position?
For organization, it has different sides. On game day, I saw videos. I had friends who were all over venues in Mexico, Canada, and the US. I saw that there were issues with accreditation. For journalists, for example, there were certain stadia in the US that journalists had to queue for ridiculously long periods to get into the stadia. So if you speak to journalists, they'll tell you that maybe the accreditation period wasn't well planned. So that, of course, that's a minus to the organization.
Major minus.
You also had issues with tickets. With FIFA even messing up a bit. FIFA, I'm aware that I'm aware that the Italian newspaper, for example, Gazzetto dello Sport, had 5 tickets for the final game, and 3 were withdrawn. They ended up being given 2 by FIFA. So of course, without any reasons being adduced for those reductions, and everybody who knows football knows that Gazzetto is a major football newspaper in the sport. But for whatever reason, it was withdrawn. And that was done by FIFA. So of course, that's still on the media side. For the fan side, there were a lot of issues with the distances between the cities where the games were hosted was a big problem. Some cities were 6 hours apart. It was a problem for fans, it was a problem for players. And I think we might have noticed that as we go into the later stages of the competition, players started having issues with muscular issues, cramps and muscular injuries because of all too much traveling and all of that, which at the end might have diluted the quality we saw from the competition. Overall, organization wasn't bad, but there were a few things that could have been managed better. Although you might also argue that that's one of the risks of having 3 different countries have host competitions. But yeah, overall, I think I'll score the organization an 8. It wasn't bad. They did quite well. It would have been easier for them to manage logistics if everything was held in one country. But overall, I think an 8/10 is fair.
Well, attendance exceeded 6.8 million and making it easily the biggest World Cup ever.
Yes, it did. It did, which is not too surprising considering that this is the first World Cup with 48 teams. So 48 teams meant 16 additional teams, meant additional fans from those 16 teams. So invariably, you would have more people trying to attend the World Cup because there were teams that had never attended the World Cup before, whose fans would follow them wherever. On the flip side, you have to also look at attendance based on location.
Yeah.
Generally, the attendance in the US was very good. Attendance in Mexico was also good. But there were some games in Canada that the stadia were not full. So, you have to juxtapose those Canada and the US and Mexico with Canada. Overall, 6.8 is a lot. It's the largest ever in any World Cup. But it could have been better. If Canada had more field stadia like US and Mexico, we probably would have got over 7 million.
Okay. Let's break it down in terms of what each of the host countries brought. We saw technology, we saw Mexican flair, and Canada showed too that it was ready to organize big sports. You want to take them one after the other, what particularly they brought to the
table. Yeah, for the US, is a big economy. Even if they are not such a well-known footballing nation, but the economy is big and there's wealth in the country. So you could tell it showed. They basically owned that World Cup in many ways. So from their own perspective, they brought a lot to it. They brought razzmatazz that hardcore football fans were not sure they wanted in that competition. But anyways, they imposed themselves on the competition, which is a typical American way. And at the end of the day, it doesn't feel so bad in hindsight, even if in the moment it felt like it was unnecessarily distracting.
And then they were robbing the game of something.
Of something, yes, because you had games that had too many distractions. You had games that took longer than they should have. The final, for example, a typical football game doesn't take more than 2 hours, except you go to extra time. The final took almost 2.5 hours without going to extra time. So, of course, it changed how football is seen. from people who have been watching the game for such a long time. For Mexico, they have history.
Yeah.
Mexico has history, particularly because the Azteca was also used. The Azteca is a magical stadium.
With plenty of history.
With a lot of history. Almost 100,000 capacity stadium. So, it delivered. The Mexican fans really showed up, and then he gave all the things that played in Mexico had all the support they needed.
Yeah.
Canada tried. I think they did the best they could because, one, they have a growing team. They are not a football superpower or a football powerhouse in that sense. So, and it showed. Particularly, Canada's major issues came in the early afternoon games. The lowest attendances you had in Canada were for games that were from 2 p.m.
Yeah.
So maybe it was work. Maybe people had businesses to run, had offices to go to. But the 2 p.m. games in Canada were the ones in the entire World Cup that had the lowest attendances. But overall, all three countries pulled their weight, and at the end of the day, it turned it into a competition that we would remember. Even if not for the football, we'll remember for a lot of other things.
Yeah, and it just confirmed that the World Cup could succeed with multiple hosts.
Yes, it does. It does. Although it also means that it will require a lot more financial investments because traveling 6 hours is the cost associated with moving around all of these countries is a great deal. So, and FIFA rose up to the occasion, increased prize money for winning teams, increased allocations for all the participating teams, and all the support they gave the countries because they knew that particularly federations from the smaller countries would struggle with the financial outlay they would have to do for that World Cup. But yeah, 48 teams at the end of the day, it wasn't such a bad thing. Typically, your World Cup, this World Cup, you had 104 games in the group stage.
Yeah.
In the entire World Cup, even with 32 teams, you don't even have 104 games. So what you had in the group stage alone was more than what you have in the entire competition for a standard World Cup.
Okay.
So, of course, for FIFA, that helped with advertising revenue and gate takings and all of that. But it's a mixed bag, really. But at the end of the day, I think the 48-team experiments, overall, I'll say it worked. A few glitches here and there, but I think it eventually gave us things that we might never have seen in a World Cup.
All right. Would you like the next World Cup to be 48 or 64 like the Infantino man is planning?
Well, I think we're still struggling to deal with 48. 64 will be an overkill and will significantly dilute the quality you see in a World Cup. Because as we speak, you struggle to... Okay, if you were to name 64 footballing countries in the world today, regardless of where they come from, you probably will find 64 reasonably good footballing countries. Yeah. But based on the split of the qualifications, exactly, you will have some teams coming from certain confederations that will not be able to pull their weight in the World Cup, regardless of how you want to butter them up. So 64 teams will be a drastic overkill, and I can guarantee we will not see the quality that people are still disputing in this 48-team World Cup. We won't see anything near to it in a 64-team World Cup.
Okay, before we take a break, I just want to refresh memories of Nigerians that the very first man I heard talk about a 3 or 4 nation co-hosting of the World Cup was our own legend, Segun Odegbami.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, World Cup 2010, he did a memo to the then president, Olusegun Obasanjo, saying that Nigeria could lead a West African hosting of the World Cup. He shared the script with me, and I looked at it, played it, the devil's advocate, and were able to put together a few things. Unfortunately, Obasanjo told us that Becky is his friend. Becky wants to use the World Cup to do this and to do that, and tried as Odegbami and his team, which also included me.
Yeah,
we didn't push through.
traction.
No, it didn't get much traction because of Obasanjo's sympathy for the then South African president. So, would you recommend an African thing coming from that?
Yeah, yes, for different reasons. For one, apart from maybe South Africa and Morocco, I struggle to see any other African country that will be able to single-handedly host a World Cup today. And that's a fact, regardless of how people feel about it.
Logistic, finance, and
All the logistics alone
infrastructure.
will kill many African countries because, the transportation network you require to get a World Cup hosted is ridiculously huge. People, from the outside, people don't understand it, but it is a lot to do. And when you think of all the reliefs that even the US had to do on train trips and all of those things, reducing costs for fans traveling by train from city to city, you struggle to see, first and foremost, how many African countries have such infrastructure. Not very many.
Not very many,
And
in all honesty.
And when you then look at it, if you have only 2 African countries that currently have the infrastructure and probably will be ready in time anytime soon to do that, the only way Africa will be able to host a World Cup outside these countries I've mentioned will be to co-host. The West African thing, the countries that he mentioned at that time are not the richest in Africa, but their economies were not as bad as they are today. So they probably would have been able to pull it off. But today, the countries that he mentioned are currently struggling, inclusive of Nigeria.
Yeah.
So it will be difficult to see how we'll do that. But yeah, maybe 3, maybe 4, if you do a 4-5 nation co-host arrangement, we might be able to pull it off. But it's not something that I think Africa can do in the next 20 years.
Oh dear. All right, so no World Cup for us for some time.
For some time.
Okay. Well, we'll take a break. When we come back, the rest of the program. Best of football. All right, we are back with the best of football. And Jide is still with me as we put a searchlight on the expanded format that it created opportunity for some smaller teams.
Yeah.
And the emergence of Norway as the small country with plenty of energy in football, and England returning, at some stage. I leave it to roll the carpet out.
Yeah, the 48-team competition, despite all the logistics challenges, gave us opportunity to see a lot of things we would have missed. These much smaller countries came to the party. And when you talk about smaller countries, most people will talk about Cape Verde and the Curaçaos, but you have to add the Norways, because in all honesty, people forget that in Norway is actually a small country. Very small population. Same thing for Croatia. Very small countries, but because they already had previous football heritage, it was easier for them. But at least we can speak about a Curaçao, a Haiti. Haiti is a country that almost nobody wants to visit because of all the issues they've had over the last few years. Natural disasters, the wars, and all of that. But they came to the World Cup and they were not disgraced. To a large extent, when I was watching that World Cup, I was trying to imagine some of these so-called smaller teams against many African football countries. And you would struggle to see a Curaçao losing. There are not many African countries that Curaçao would lose to. If you look at the way they played in that World Cup and look at the way the smaller African teams play generally. Exactly. Same for Haiti. Same for Panama. That's another very small country. Very, very small country. Yeah. But they gave a very good account of themselves. So if there's one thing we can say is a positive for the 48-team expanded World Cup, it's the fact that we got to see smaller countries show what they are made of. And then we got to hear of players that we had never heard before.
Yeah.
Now, recently you hear of Cape Verde goalkeeper Vozinho going to play in Chile for a club, very popular club in Chile. But more than the fact that he's moving to Chile is the fact that he's going to earn more than he has ever earned in his life.
Exactly.
And for a 40-year-old, that's very, very good.
A second life.
It's a second life, believe me, because typically for a footballer, by 40, you are not even playing football.
Exactly.
So if you are, and even if they're going to earn good money for 2 years, it's something that would help him for the rest of his life. So for Team World Cup, overall, not such a bad idea.
Egypt produced an unusually memorable performance because the Egyptian national team have always been poor travelers, but this time.
Yes, they did. They did. Surprisingly, because as big as Egypt has been on the African continent, they hadn't really won many games in the World Cup up till this year.
Yeah.
Which is funny because they were in the World Cup as early as 1934. So if you were in 1934 World Cup and you still haven't won many games as at 2026, it says, like you said, that they are very poor travelers. But they managed to turn that around this year and could have done a lot. Well, not even could, should have done a lot better, but for certain, unexplainable situations that happened in that game.
Some of those calls.
They should have done much better. But they came back to the party and reminded us of the powers that Egypt is in African football.
Okay, Morocco constantly on the rise, but I would say they froze against France. Disappointingly.
They did. I think I have a theory that the 2022 Moroccan team would have beaten France.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
It was a much better team, even though, well, maybe the coaches were changed and coaches were even changed. The Moroccan coach was changed less than 2 months to the World Cup. So maybe that affected how the team played. And then there were certain players from 2022 that were not in this year's World Cup, but they froze. What they showed against France was a complete departure of how they had played before that French game. They didn't show us any of the quality we had seen in the previous games in the competition. But regardless, Morocco has shown that they are Africa's light bearers in the World Cup. There's no team in Africa over the last 10 years that has done as well, but over the last 15, 20 years that's done as well as Morocco in the World Cup.
True.
So it's looking like in the next 4 years they probably would be Africa's single light bearers as well, except the likes of Nigeria, maybe Ivory Coast come to the party, and maybe Senegal.
Okay, England. Well, football didn't go home, but they also gave a good account of themselves.
They did. Football never seems to go home. It hasn't gone home since 1966. It hasn't even gone anywhere, whether it's in the World Cup or in the Euros or anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere since 1966. So England is a hugely underwhelming team for the quality they are supposed to have. And I say supposed to, because of recent, we've had discussions as to how much quality the English players actually have. Individually, compared to their counterparts from France, from Germany, from Spain, Italy. But that said, they have the best league arguably the best league in Europe, maybe even in the world. So you'd like to think that they would have done a lot better than they did. But, well, they got to the semi-finals, which is more than you can see for some of the so-called other bigger teams in the world. So they are making progress. You just hope that they're able to break the barrier that gets them to the final level, and then maybe win it very soon. But like football, how football works, every team has golden generations. You hope that before this generation of English footballers goes away, they're able to win a World Cup.
Champagne soccer for the third place playoff, I dare to say. And some people think they compensated their fans with that performance.
They did. They needed to win because prior to 1966, England had not won any medal in the World Cup. So they needed, or post 1966, I should have said. So they needed that medal, if nothing else, to be able to for a bragging rights for future times. And the game was strange. So third place games are usually different from finals. They are not as cagey or as tactical, but then you still don't expect to see a 10-game third place match.
Yeah.
It happened that way because I think England wanted it more than France.
Yep.
I'm not sure. France didn't really put heart and soul into that game. And by the time they realized that they were going to be embarrassed, the game was already out of their grasp. And they tried to remedy the situation in the second half, but it was too late.
It was too late. Well, Spain, the new world champions, with a particularly young side.
Yes.
And I don't know how anybody's going to stop them the next Euros and the next World Cup, because Kubasi, who kept Mbappe out of the encounter, is only 19.
Yes, he is.
By the next World Cup, he'll be 23.
Yeah.
With tons of experience. Then, of course, the little magician on the right wing and the rest of that. The Spanish team started with a bit of a slow engine. But
They did.
Yeah, revved.
They did. So Spain did what Germany typically does. Germany and Italy are the teams that we usually used to call tournament teams. They don't start quick, but they build into the competition, and by the end, they're usually at the very end and probably even win the competitions. Spain started slowly. They were not fantastic. In fact, people did not pay any attention to Spain up until like the quarterfinals. They were expected to qualify from that group, but they didn't do anything fantastic. All the attention was on France and Morocco and, teams like that. But they grew into the competition, and, they're a team that knew what they were there for. They knew the quality they had. They knew what they needed to do. And they did it very well. And it is looking like they might be dominating world football for some time. What they've done this year is the same thing they did after winning the World Cup in 2010, 2012. Between 2008 and 2012, they held the World Cup and the Euros titles at the same time.
Yeah.
They've done the same thing again, currently holding the European Championship title, and now the World Cup. But after, in that period, they couldn't win again up till now. So we hope that history doesn't repeat itself, because if it does, then Spain might take another 18 years to win a title.
Yeah, Jide, I can't help going back to Cape Verde.
Yeah.
Small country, like we'll say, not quite the size of our population of Surulere.
Yeah.
Going to the World Cup, and I mean, showing such prowess, making a very strong impression.
Yeah, so Cape Verde, very interesting country. That's a country I've followed for a while. I think, if I'm not mistaken, their first AFCON was about 12 years ago. And I just kind of liked the country from then, maybe more for the brand of football they play. They have a lot of Portuguese and Spanish influences in their football, and it shows.
Yeah.
They are more technical than your typical West African team. I'll say that very boldly. The West African teams have bigger names and bigger players abroad, but maybe definitely not as technically sound as some of the Cape Verde players that I have seen, because those Cape Verde players grew up in Portuguese and Spanish academies, so they've learned the actual proper rudiments of the game. Because of their size and the fact that they don't have players in the biggest clubs in the world, it has always affected them in AFCONs. But with the newfound confidence that they have, I will not be surprised to see a Cape Verde giving the bigger names a very good run for their money going forward. And you just might see a Cape Verde get into the quarterfinals, and maybe even more like a quarterfinal of an AFCON very soon, because the problem with teams like that is that there's all seems to be a complex that they get when they face the bigger teams, and it almost always seems to affect them. But in one-off games, they can hold their own against any team in Africa.
Okay, Jide, the knockout rounds, produce some very dramatic results, matches. But observers believe that the quarterfinals onwards, it became more tactical than spectacular.
Yeah.
Everybody was playing chess, and even the finals was even
Yes,
not quite the finals that you expected.
Yeah, because of the prize on offer. First and foremost is the World Cup.
Yeah.
Only very few countries in the history of the world can claim to have won a World Cup. So when you get to a World Cup and you know you have the quality to go far, you tend to be very careful with how you navigate your games. Once you step out of the group stages, it dawns on you how serious this whole thing is. And then that's where you find the teams who are the upper tier, upper end of the ladder became a bit more careful. And that's where people, in hindsight, that's where France, for all the flair they showed in the group stages, they dropped back a bit. Even France became a bit more tactical. They were not as open, as free-flowing as they were in the group stages.
Okay.
Because the weight of expectation now started affecting them, and the opportunities they knew they had. So which is normal, even though for free football watchers, it reduces how much enjoyment you have of the game. But the prize at stake dictates that the closer you get to your goal, the more careful and more tactical you become, we saw that in this World Cup. The only teams that did not really do much in that sense were the teams that had actually shown that they were already poor from the beginning of the competition. The Belgiums, the Portugals, they were not really as good as everybody thought they would be. Even Holland to a large extent, But all the big guns got there. Argentina played like that for the whole competition. They played as though every game was do or die for them. And that's why they got as far as they did. If they had opened up in certain games, they probably would have lost those games. But it's expected, and it's not something that we've not seen before.
Okay, we saw lots of pressing, a lot of low block. Did the tournament confirm modern trend in the game?
Yes, it did. So typically, the teams that feel they have less quality in certain areas of the pitch tend to not open up themselves to the bigger teams. So when teams typically play low block, it's because they give too much respect to their opponents to say, okay, we know you have bigger players, you have more technical players, and if we allow ourselves get careless, you will destroy us. So we'll all sit back and see what we can do and hope for the best on counters and set pieces, free kicks and corner kicks. We saw a lot of that, particularly when you see big names play the smaller names. The Cape Verde was an exception to that. But typically, you saw it when the big teams played. You saw how France and Paraguay played. Paraguay played, it was one side attacking for almost 90 minutes, the other trying to contain. So it was something we saw a lot in the competition, but it's something we see a lot in European football, even at club level as well. If you remember how the Champions League plays, smaller teams tend to sit back a lot against the bigger ones and hope for counter-attack. So it's just like you said, it just confirmed where the modern trend in football is at the moment.
All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll look at, well, we can't avoid looking at the darker sides. We will do that after this timeout. Best of football. All right, this is still the best of football. Jide and I are here doing some post-mortem, though likely from a helicopter view. Jide, many journalists and followers of the game conclude that while the football was entertaining, FIFA generated unnecessary controversies. Do you agree?
Yes, while the football was entertaining, to a large degree. Maybe not as entertaining as some other World Cups, but to a large degree was entertaining. But yes, this World Cup also had its dark sides. The dark side started before the competition. And then FIFA embellished it significantly in the course of the competition. There were a lot of unnecessary controversies in this World Cup. You had FIFA do things that ordinarily should not be acceptable to anybody. But you have an Infantino who is a king in his own eyes and just does whatever he seems to like to want and doesn't care what anybody says. Or as we speak, there are consequences already. because UEFA is already planning certain things to see how they can get rid of him. But the dark sides of that competition were really based on what FIFA allowed. I personally felt they should have been stronger because FIFA has typically not given this much leeway to anybody.
Any host nation.
In any host nation in any World Cup I have watched in the past. So why they did that this time, only Infantino can give. There were VAR controversies, unnecessary VAR controversies. There were issues with tickets. You had tickets that started from $14 in the group stage and ended up at $1,700 by final, $2,500 tickets. Ridiculous, So fans were priced out of their own competition because, we like to say that these competitions are owned by the fans, but the fans couldn't get to what the competitions. There were viral videos on the internet where, there were people interviewing fans to say, how much did you pay for your ticket? And the prices you were hearing were absolutely ridiculous. So a person's 6 months salary was used to buy a one game ticket.
Crazy.
It was ridiculous. But then you find most of the people that really got to watch it were sponsored by brands. All the VIPs got brand sponsorship, so they didn't have to pay for the tickets. But the ordinary fan had to squeeze that money out from somewhere, and these are monies that fans had been saving up for 3, 4, 5 years, and to not be able to even afford the ticket after so many years was such a shame. So FIFA almost single-handedly damaged its own property, which I'm pretty sure we'll see repercussions of that in the very near future.
So it will appear that FIFA's commercial interest is very big appetite for commercial gains.
Yes.
Seem to have reduced the game.
Yes. FIFA, I would say it's like FIFA, like CAF, because CAF is following that same playbook now. Both associations are talking more about commercial value of the game as against the growth of the game, as against how fans and sponsors and everybody perceives the game. So clearly in this World Cup, FIFA paid more attention to the commercial value of the game as against how everyday ordinary fans would perceive certain decisions that were taken. And it put a lot of people in bad lights. Referees, coaches, football association presidents. A lot of people did not come out on the other side in good lights at the end of this World Cup. But it all started from how FIFA decided to handle it.
Yeah, there's so many calls, and the referees started making us think that they were really a different book of rules.
The officiating was very strange in this World Cup. And it's one of those things that FIFA already, everything stemmed from somewhere, and FIFA just made it more easy to point out certain things. The best officiating I've seen in the recent past was the 2023 AFCON. The 2023 or 2024 AFCON. The officiating in that competition was the best I have seen anywhere in a long time. You had, big football people from around the world praising the officiating in that AFCON. Since that AFCON, the AFCON following that, the WAFCON following that, after that, the WAFCON after that, the AFCON after that, and this World Cup, officiating has been a mess. And especially because this is the World Cup. It's supposed to be the highest level. You hope that the very best get to attend and bring their A games. But the officiating we saw at this World Cup gave room for conspiracy theories and all kinds of things. And it didn't speak well of FIFA and its organization.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've never been one given to conspiracy theories, but it looked like from the beginning and until the final, Infantino and his people wanted to make the World Cup 2026 a coronation, which Spain didn't let happen.
It looked like it started mainly from that calf stamp that Messi had against Algeria. In a typical game, that would have been a red card. For whatever reason, it wasn't given. VAR did not call it back to review, which was strange in the the way the competition had gone, VAR was calling back of virtually everything. So, but the fact that he didn't call that back started giving people impressions that maybe FIFA had a plan. After the Algeria game, you had the Egypt game where Osama Hassan and his players were furious because they thought there were certain...
and arguably, reasonably so.
But to a large extent, you would say, where they felt there were calls that were not justifiable. And then you had other incidences afterwards that just made it seem... I tried in the course of the competition to not believe or accept the coronation theory. But if you look back at it, there were certain calls that should have been handled a lot better. If you look at the Egypt game, for example, that first goal that was disallowed from Egypt was, if you could argue that there might have been a foul in the build-up to that first disallowed goal. But in many games, you would have been given as a 50-50 and it would have been allowed. Yeah. So because it was done in an Argentine game, he gave room for all kinds of suspicion. But at the end of the day, the competition is over. We hope not to have a competition with all this much controversy anytime soon.
Yeah, VAR's reputation declined a lot. But the women who came as match officials did fairly well.
They did well. The women are doing very well in officiating football games now. They're a lot, in many ways, they're a lot firmer than the men. And they have a very good understanding of the game. They know what they need to do. You typically don't have as much controversy in games officiated by women as you have in the ones officiated by the men. So, which tells you something if you choose to look at it from certain perspectives. But the women have done well. A few years ago, when we first started seeing women officiating male games, a lot of people were worried that, did they know what they were actually doing? Would they be firm? But they have clearly shown that they are at that level for a reason.
Okay, just before we go on another break, Croatia, end of a golden generation. Brazil didn't come to the party.
Yeah, Croatia, definitely the end of a golden generation. The golden generation should have ended 4 years ago. They forcibly prolonged it for another 4 years, but it didn't work. So you have Modric is on his way out. And about 4 or 5 of that players in that team that have already signaled international retirement, even though they will keep playing for their football clubs. So you will definitely not see a Croatia in the same way you've seen them before. For me, they were one of the disappointments of this World Cup. I thought they would do much better than they did, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out. For Brazil, it was a shame. Brazilian football has lost its identity. I'm pretty sure nobody could recognize that Brazilian team from this World Cup. They were so poor, so ordinary. There was nothing in that team to show that was a Brazilian team, particularly for those who have been watching Brazil for years. It looks like we were watching a Seychelles or one of the much smaller teams in Africa. There was absolutely nothing that Brazilian team did. And justifiably, they didn't go very far in that competition.
Okay, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll be looking at some other aspects of World Cup 2026. Best of football. Jide, World Cup 2026 will be remembered for many things, but doesn't look like it will be classed in the same category as the iconic World Cup finals, the Mexico finals, like 1970, Spain 1982, France 98, and even SA 2010. Do you agree?
Yes, definitely France 98, Mexico 70. Those were 2 classic finals. 82 was not a bad final. It was maybe because it was a bit tighter than the other 2 I just mentioned, but was also a very good final. 2010 was rather tight. Was a one-goal game. Although the fact that it was one goal did not really do justice to the quality of football played on that day. But clearly, you will not be able to put this competition, this 2026 World Cup, anywhere near those World Cup finals you have mentioned. They were completely. This was a much lower quality final than the other ones you mentioned, and maybe because of fatigue, a lot of the really big players did not really turn up in this competition, and that clearly affected the quality of what we saw overall. If all the big names were looked up to before this competition had actually turned up, we might have had a much better competition. But at the end of the day, it wasn't so bad. But, coming from a very long season, a season started for most European footballers, for example, in August. As at end of May, they were just closing their season by the end of May. And then you had only about 3 weeks to prepare to jump into a World Cup. And then a World Cup with such long distances to travel, even though the schedule gave them maybe 1 to 2 extra days of rest, but the travel time alone took away all the rest that they got between the games. So I think to a large extent, fatigue might have played a big part in how this full World Cup turned out. Overall, it turned out to be a good World Cup.
Okay, let's do some kind of arithmetical scoring. A few friends and I, talked, and we said let's score them. Organization 9/10.
Yeah, I said earlier that I'll give them an 8.
It's okay. I agree with you. Football quality 8.5/10.
Thereabouts, yes. 8.5 is good.
What about the atmosphere?
The atmosphere, I would say maybe a 7.5 to an 8, because you didn't get the same atmosphere everywhere. Atmosphere was good in Mexico. It was good in certain parts of the US. Was not really good. It was good in certain parts of Canada, but because Canada had issues with filling stadia in certain parts of Canada, the atmosphere was not as good. But overall, combined, and the fact that most of the games were played in the latter stages were played in the US, and the US turnout was really good, we'll give them an 8 for atmosphere as well.
And as a legacy?
As a legacy, it depends on what you want to remember this World Cup for. There are all kinds of things to remember it for. You could choose to remember it for the number of youngsters that showed up, that really carried their weight in this World Cup. There's also some people who look at it from all the controversies that happened. But I just choose to look at it from the fact that it was a 48-team experiment. And after 5 weeks, it turned out quite well.
It 6 or 7/10.
For that, I would say legacy, I would say 6.5.
Okay. Now, you talked about young players who turned up. Some young coaches turned up too.
Yes, quite a few young coaches turned up in the competition. Even though the vast majority of coaches were older people, but there were a few young coaches in that competition. Senegal had one. Ivory Coast had one as well.
Morocco.
Morocco's coach. Okay, the current coach is a bit older than Reguagui, who left, but he's still a young coach, reasonably young coach. So to a large extent, yes, a lot of new coach names that we had never heard before came out and did justice to themselves, because I don't think any of them can be said to have been disgraced. Even though they came to the World Cup some of them came to the World Cup with teams that did not have as much pedigree, but the coaching in this World Cup was relatively good. There were just a few exceptions, like when everybody complained about England's game against Argentina and the coaching decisions that were made in that game. But overall, coaching stood up and was counted in this one.
Okay, as we round up the program on the World Cup, do you have any message for the custodians of our football, the NFF, who I hear they're going into Congress to elect a new board. And I hear the president, who hasn't, done anything I can point at, wants to come back.
Yeah, I saw a poster. For him, campaigning for him for another tenure. It's been said over and over again. There's not much shame in the Nigerian body because, what we did, Italy did, the Federation president left. We did the same, but the Federation president is looking for another tenure. Tells you that, like we say on the streets, these people don't rate us very much because they know. And the problem is that the structure of the Congress, it's been said over and over again that the structure of the elective Congress of the NFF is defective because you have state FA chairmen that are government appointees.
Exactly.
You have club chairmen that are majority government appointees.
Exactly.
So what you have is that the people who actually make decisions in the NFA elective Congress typically will swing whichever way the government instructs them to swing. So you don't always have the best. Because if you look at how many times Segun Odegbami contested for that NFF presidency when he was NFA, when he became an NFF, and how he happened not to win any of them, you know that it's a cartel in some ways because the same people that have been around our football for years are still there.
They are still there.
And they still want to continue to be there.
Doing nothing.
Because, this is the second straight World Cup we've missed. And nobody has said anything about it. And if we are not careful, if they do the same things again, we'll miss the next World Cup. And it will be such a shame. But this is Nigeria. We'll see what happens.
All right. Jide, it's been a marathon, but you've carried it through. I want to say thank you for your very incisive interrogation and presentation of World Cup 2026.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. The World Cup it took us, some of us, gave us reasons to get distracted from other things that life was throwing at us. So it was fun. It was fun while it lasted. Thank you very much.
All right. That will be all for the program this week. We'll be back same time next week, and we'll be talking something different and something not so new. The EPL, we want to look at their transfers and what the transfer window is open, right, Jide?
Yes, it is. So, yes, next week will be a good time to look at all the moves that have happened in Europe generally, particularly with regards to the English Premier League.
Okay, that's where we draw the curtain on the program this week. Don't forget to join us same time next week. And then, of course, watch us on all our social media platforms. Best of football.